What happens when the most feared warrior in human space meets an alien child who has never known kindness? When Captain Marcus Frostbite Chen, the man who single-handedly held the line at Kepler Station while thousands evacuated behind him, finds himself face-to-face with a creature that should be his enemy, everything he thought he knew about war, peace, and what it means to be human. This is the story of how the coldest heart in the galaxy learned to beat warm again, and how a small act of mercy between species became the catalyst that would reshape the future of two civilizations. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with words that heal instead of harm. Get ready for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about strength, courage, and the true meaning of humanity. The transport ship Meridian's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning against the sudden shift from the ethereal calm of faster-than-light travel to the harsh reality of normal space. Captain Marcus Chen felt the familiar lurch in his stomach, but his face remained as impassive as carved stone. 23 years of military service had taught him to keep his reactions buried deep, where they couldn't be used against him. "Captain, we're approaching the Nexus station," announced Lieutenant Sarah Park from the navigation console. Her voice carried the crisp professionalism that Marcus had come to expect from his crew, but underneath it, he could detect the faint tremor of anticipation. This wasn't just any routine mission. Marcus stood from his command chair, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bridge's dim lighting. At 45, he carried himself with the controlled grace of a predator, every movement calculated and precise. His fellow officers had nicknamed him Frostbite years ago, not just for his pale blue eyes that seemed to freeze anyone who met his gaze, but for the way he could shut down his emotions completely in the heat of battle. It was a reputation he'd earned through blood and sacrifice, and one that had kept him alive when lesser men had fallen. "Put the station on screen," he ordered, stepping closer to the main viewport. The image that materialized before them was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Nexus Station hung in the void like a massive metal flower, its petals formed by rotating habitat rings that housed nearly 2 million beings from dozens of different species. It was humanity's first truly integrated space station, a symbol of the new age of cooperation that had emerged after the Convergence Wars ended 3 years ago. Marcus had spent most of those wars fighting the very aliens who now called this place home. "Sir," came the voice of Communications Officer Torres, "we're receiving docking instructions from Station Control. Bay 94, Section Delta." "Acknowledged." "Take us in, Park." As the Meridian's Edge maneuvered through the controlled chaos of ships surrounding the station, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of irony pressing down on him. Here he was, the man who had single-handedly held Kepler Station against a Zephyrian assault force for 18 hours while civilians evacuated, now being assigned as a diplomatic liaison to help maintain peace with the same species he'd once fought so fiercely. The docking process was smooth, a testament to the engineering prowess of the combined alien-human construction teams that had built Nexus Station. Marcus felt the gentle bump as the ship's magnetic clamps engaged, followed by the hiss of atmospheric processors equalizing pressure between the vessel and the station. "Captain," Lieutenant Park said, turning in her chair, "Admiral Reeves has requested that you report to Conference Room 7 as soon as you're aboard. Apparently, there's been a situation." Marcus nodded curtly. In his experience, situations on diplomatic stations usually meant someone had said or done something stupid, and now he'd have to clean up the mess. It was exactly the kind of assignment that made him long for the simple clarity of combat, where the objectives were clear and the solutions usually involved superior firepower. "You have the con, Park. I'll be back within the hour." The airlock cycled open with a soft pneumatic whisper, and Marcus stepped onto Nexus Station for the first time. The immediately noticeable thing was the smell, not the recycled air and metal polish he was used to on human vessels, but something more complex. There were hints of ozone from the alien atmospheric processors, the faint floral scent that Zephyrians carried with them, and underneath it all, the indefinable mixture of 100 different species sharing the same space. The corridors of Nexus Station were a marvel of engineering and diplomacy. The walls curved gently upward, designed to accommodate species that were more comfortable with non-linear architecture, while the flooring contained subtle variations in texture and temperature to suit different biological needs. Soft bioluminescent strips provided lighting that could shift spectrum based on the species present, detected by sensors embedded throughout the station. As Marcus made his way through the main concourse toward Conference Room 7, a group of Zephyrians glided past, their translucent jellyfish-like forms rippling with colors that indicated contentment and curiosity. Their large, dark eyes turned toward him briefly, and he saw no hostility there, only the mild interest that any being might show toward a newcomer. Further down the corridor, a Cordhack delegation was engaged in what appeared to be animated conversation with several human merchants. The Cordhack were imposing even by alien standards, 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous plates that clinked softly when they moved, with 4 arms that ended in delicate, almost surgical precision manipulators. Their wedge-shaped heads swiveled constantly, taking in everything around them with compound eyes that missed nothing. Marcus had fought both species during the wars, had seen friends die under Zephyrian energy weapons and Cordhack siege tactics. Yet here they were, conducting business, sharing meals in the station's restaurants, even laughing together at jokes he couldn't possibly understand. It was a testament to the resilience of intelligent life, he supposed, this ability to move past conflict toward cooperation. But it also made him feel oddly displaced, like a relic from a more violent time. Conference Room 7 turned out to be a spacious chamber with a large oval table surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate multiple species anatomies. Admiral Reeves was already there, along with several other officers Marcus didn't recognize and 3 aliens, 1 Zephyrian, 1 Cordhack, and a 3rd species he'd never encountered before. Marcus, Admiral Reeves stood as he entered, extending a hand. "Good to see you again. I know this assignment isn't exactly what you requested, but we needed someone with your particular expertise." Marcus shook the Admiral's hand, noting the careful way the older man chose his words. Admiral Reeves had been his commanding officer during the siege of Kepler Station, and the 2 men shared the kind of unspoken understanding that came from surviving impossible odds together. "What's the situation, sir? Have a seat, and we'll bring you up to speed." The Admiral gestured toward an empty chair. "This is Ambassador Leith from the Zephyrian Collective," he indicated the flowing, translucent being to his right. "Commander Takush from the Cordhack Republic." The large, chitinous figure across the table inclined his head slightly. "And this is Dr. Veltar from the Sereni Commonwealth." Marcus studied the 3rd alien with professional interest. Dr. Veltar was humanoid, but distinctly not human, with elongated features, pale blue skin, and large, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths of sadness. The Serani were a new addition to the galactic community, having only recently achieved faster-than-light capability and been welcomed into the growing alliance of species. "The problem," Admiral Reeves continued, settling back into his chair, "is that we've had a series of incidents over the past 2 weeks. Someone has been vandalizing Serani quarters, leaving threatening messages, and yesterday things escalated to actual physical assault." Ambassador Lyeth's form shimmered with colors that Marcus had learned to recognize as distress during his military briefings. When the Zephyrians spoke, their voice had the melodic quality that all their species possessed, but underneath it was an edge of concern. "The attacks appear to be specifically targeting Serani children," Lyeth said. 3 young ones have been hurt, and their families are beginning to question whether the station is safe for them. Commander Tox clicked his mandibles together, a Cordhack gesture of agreement. "This threatens the stability of the entire station. If word spreads that children are not safe here, it could undermine years of diplomatic progress." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Do we have any leads on who's responsible?" "That's where it gets complicated," Admiral Reeves said. "The security footage shows the perpetrators are human, young humans, maybe late teens or early 20s. They know how to avoid the main surveillance networks, which suggests military training or at least familiarity with station security protocols. The implications hit Marcus immediately. Disaffected human military personnel, probably veterans who couldn't adjust to the new reality of peace, with former enemies. He'd seen it before on other stations. Soldiers who'd lost friends in the war and couldn't accept that those same species were now allies. It was a problem that the brass preferred to handle quietly, before it could become a public relations nightmare. "I assume you want me to track them down," Marcus said. "It's more complicated than that," Dr. Veltar spoke for the first time, her voice soft but carrying an unmistakable strength. "We believe the humans responsible may be part of a larger group that's been spreading anti-alien propaganda throughout the station. They're not just random troublemakers, they're organized." Admiral Reeves nodded grimly. "We need someone who can infiltrate their group, figure out who's leading them and what their ultimate goals are. Someone who has the military background to relate to them, but also the discipline to handle this delicately." "The children who were hurt," Marcus said, looking directly at Dr. Veltar. "How bad were their injuries?" The Serani doctor's large eyes seemed to grow even sadder, if that was possible. "Physically, they will recover. But psychologically, Serani children are extremely empathic. They can sense emotions and intentions from other beings. To be attacked with such hatred and anger, it leaves scars that may never fully heal." Something cold twisted in Marcus's chest. We'd spent years learning to shut down his emotions, to become the perfect soldier who could do whatever was necessary without hesitation. But the thought of children being hurt by fear and hatred, it touched something deep inside him that he thought was permanently buried. "I'll need full access to the security reports and a cover identity that will let me move freely through the station," he said. "How soon can that be arranged?" "Already done," Admiral Reeves smiled grimly. "As far as anyone knows, you're Marcus Chen, recently discharged Marine looking for work on the station. Your service record has been altered to show some disagreements with current military policy regarding alien integration. And if I find this group, you gather intelligence first." The Admiral's expression grew serious. "We need to know how extensive this organization is, whether it has connections to similar groups on other stations or planets. Only after we have the full picture do we move to shut them down." Marcus nodded, but privately he wondered if he'd be able to maintain that level of restraint when he came face to face with the people who had been hurting children. The old Marcus, the one who had earned the nickname Frostbite, would have been able to approach this with complete professional detachment. But something about being on this station, surrounded by former enemies who were now neighbors and colleagues, was stirring up feelings he'd kept locked away for years. "There's one more thing," Dr. Veltar said quietly. "The children who were attacked, they've been asking for protection, not from security officers or automated systems, but from someone who understands what it's like to be afraid, someone who can make them feel safe." "I'm not exactly known for my bedside manner," Marcus said. "No," the doctor agreed, "but you're known for keeping people safe when everything else fails. That's a different kind of comfort, but it's one these children desperately need." After the briefing ended and the others had left, Marcus found himself alone in the conference room, staring out through the large viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were the worlds these children came from, civilizations that had decided to trust humanity enough to send their young ones to live and learn on a station like this. And somewhere on this very station were humans who saw that trust as weakness to be exploited. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, he'd been the weapon that humanity pointed at its enemies. Now he was being asked to protect those same enemies from his own species. It should have felt wrong, should have conflicted with everything he'd been trained to believe. Instead, it felt like the first mission he'd been given in years that actually mattered. Marcus stood and walked to the viewport, pressing one hand against the cool, transparent aluminum. In the reflection, he could see his own face, hard lines carved by years of war, pale eyes that had seen too much death, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Frostbite Chen, the man who never showed weakness, never backed down, never let emotion interfere with the mission. But maybe, just maybe, This mission required something more than the perfect soldier. Maybe it required something closer to a human being. He had no idea how right he was, or how much his life was about to change. Marcus spent his first full day on Nexus Station, learning its rhythms and patterns. The station operated on a 26-hour cycle that accommodated the biological needs of most species, with distinct periods for different activities. The morning shift saw heavy commercial traffic as merchants and traders conducted business, while the afternoon brought a more relaxed atmosphere as families moved through the recreational areas and educational sectors. His cover identity had been expertly crafted by military intelligence. Marcus Chen, former Marine Sergeant, discharged 6 months ago after a disciplinary action involving inappropriate comments about alien integration policies. The paperwork showed a pattern of insubordination and resistance to the new diplomatic initiatives. It was exactly the kind of background that would appeal to an anti-alien organization looking for recruits. The residential sector where most humans lived was located in the station's outer ring, where rotation provided Earth-normal gravity. Marcus had been assigned a small apartment that looked lived-in enough to support his cover story, a few personal items from his supposed military service, some civilian clothes that had seen better days, and a small collection of books about human military history that painted alien species in an unfavorable light. As he walked through the human residential areas, Marcus began to pick up on subtle signs of the tensions that existed beneath the station's peaceful surface. Human civilians moved in loose groups, rarely alone, and their conversations often quieted when aliens passed nearby. There were graffiti tags in corridor alcoves, nothing overtly threatening, but symbols and phrases that carried undertones of human superiority and alien distrust. The most telling sign was in the children. Human children on the station played in carefully segregated groups, and their games often involved humans versus aliens scenarios where the humans were always the heroes and the aliens were portrayed as monsters or invaders. Their parents watched these games with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to approving. Marcus was sitting in O'Malley's, one of the 3 bars in the human sector, nursing a synthetic beer and listening to conversations when he first heard direct reference to the organization he was looking for. "Telling you, Chen might be exactly what we need," a voice at the table behind him said. Marcus recognized the speaker as David Torres, a civilian contractor who worked in the station's maintenance division. His service record shows he's got the right attitude about the situation here. "Female," with the crisp diction that suggested military training, "we need to be careful about who we trust. Security's been sniffing around since the incidents with the Blueskins." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the slur. The Sirani were often called Blueskins by humans who either couldn't or wouldn't bother to learn their actual species name. It was the kind of casual dehumanization that made violence seem more acceptable. "What do you think, Marcus?" Torres turned around in his chair, addressing him directly. "You've been listening to us talk for 10 minutes. You interested in hearing about opportunities for someone with your background?" Marcus took a slow sip of his beer, buying time to get into character. "Depends on the opportunities," he said, letting a hint of bitterness creep into his voice. "I didn't spend 15 years fighting aliens just to watch them move into human space and pretend we're all friends now." The woman at Torres's table leaned forward, studying Marcus with sharp green eyes. She was maybe 30, with short brown hair and the kind of muscle tone that came from regular physical training. "Sarah Mitchell," she said, extending a hand. "I used to be a lieutenant in the Colonial Marines before I got tired of the new sensitivity training requirements." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip in the way she held eye contact. "Marcus Chen, recently unemployed Marine." "We heard," Torres said with a grin. "Word gets around fast in a place like this." "Apparently you had some strong opinions about the integration policies." "I had some strong opinions about watching good soldiers get disciplinary action for stating obvious facts," Marcus replied. "Like the fact that 3 years isn't long enough to forget a war that lasted 8. That's exactly what we've been saying. These aliens, they come here with their children and their families, acting like they belong. But what happens when their home governments decide they want something we have? What happens when they decide peace isn't profitable anymore? You think they're planning something? Marcus asked, careful to sound interested rather than skeptical. I think they're infiltrating, Torres said, lowering his voice. Look around this station. Alien children in human schools, learning our languages, our customs, our weaknesses. Alien adults in positions of authority, with access to our technology and our security protocols. It's the perfect setup for a takeover from within. Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering this perspective. So what do you propose to do about it? Sarah and Torres exchanged a look, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. There are others who feel the way we do. People in positions throughout the station who understand that humanity needs to look out for its own interests first. We've been organizing. Organizing how? Small actions at first, Torres said. Making sure the aliens understand that not all humans are happy about this integration experiment. Showing them that there are consequences for thinking they can just move into our spaces and expect to be welcomed. The cold feeling in Marcus's chest was growing stronger. These people weren't just spreading propaganda. They were actively working to intimidate alien families, including children, and they were talking about it like it was patriotic duty. The incidents with the Sirani, Marcus said carefully. That was your group? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Information like that isn't shared with everyone. But hypothetically, if someone were to take action to protect human interests on this station, would you have a problem with that? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Depends on how far they were willing to go. As far as necessary, she said. The question is, are you someone who can be trusted to understand what necessary means? Before Marcus could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the street outside. Through the bar's large windows, they could see a crowd gathering around something in the main concourse. Discouragement from Azio. Security officers were moving toward the disturbance, their bright yellow uniforms standing out against the mixed crowd of humans and aliens. Wonder what that's about, Torres muttered, standing up to get a better view. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Let's find out. The scene in the concourse was chaotic, but not violent. A young Sirani child, maybe 8 or 9 in Earth years, was sitting on the floor crying while her parents tried to comfort her. Around them, a crowd of mixed species had gathered, all talking at once in at least 6 different languages. Security officers were trying to establish a perimeter and figure out what had happened. What's going on? Marcus asked a human bystander. Kid got knocked down, the man replied. Some humans were running through here like they were being chased. Didn't stop to help or apologize or anything. Poor little thing's been crying for 10 minutes. Marcus looked at the child more closely. She was small even for her species, with the characteristic pale blue skin and large dark eyes that all Sirani possessed. Her clothes were torn at the knee where she'd hit the ground, and there was a small cut on her arm that was bleeding a substance that looked more silver than red. What struck him most, though, was the way she kept looking around at the crowd with an expression of absolute terror. Her parents were speaking to her in their own language, gentle musical sounds that should have been comforting, but the child seemed beyond comfort. She's empathic, said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to see Dr. Veltar approaching, moving quickly but trying not to add to the chaos. Sirani children can sense emotions from everyone around them. Right now she's feeling the anger and fear and confusion of everyone in this crowd all at once. Dr. Veltar knelt beside the family, speaking quietly in the Sirani language. The child's parents responded, their voices tight with worry and frustration. After a moment, the doctor looked up at the gathering crowd. Please, she said, her soft voice somehow carrying over the noise. She needs space. The emotional intensity is overwhelming her. Most of the crowd began to disperse, aliens and humans alike understanding that their presence was making things worse for the injured child. But a few humans remained, and Marcus could hear their muttered comments. Freaky little blue thing. Maybe if they stayed in their own sectors, this wouldn't happen. Probably faking it for attention anyway. The child's crying intensified, and her parents looked around helplessly. Dr. Veltar was examining the cut on her arm, but it was clear that the physical injury was the least of the child's problems. Marcus found himself stepping forward before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. The crowd parted around him as he approached the family, and he knelt down about 3 feet away from them, careful not to invade their space. "What's her name?" he asked. "Dr. Veltar quietly." "Kira," the doctor replied, glancing at him with surprise. "But I don't think—" "Kira," Marcus said, speaking directly to the child. His voice was calm and steady, the same tone he'd used to reassure frightened soldiers during the war. "My name is Marcus. I'm going to stay right here until you feel better, okay?" The child looked at him with those large, dark eyes, still crying but with less intensity. Marcus could see her struggling with the emotional chaos around her, trying to process feelings that weren't her own. "I know it's scary," he continued, still in that calm, steady voice. "All these feelings that don't belong to you. But I'm right here, and I'm not scared. I'm not angry. I'm just going to sit here and think calm thoughts until you're ready." Marcus closed his eyes and began to do exactly what he'd promised. Think calm thoughts. Dory and Dory Turkle. With Trust Teddy, he pictured peaceful places from his childhood, a lake in northern Canada where his family used to camp, the sound of wind in pine trees, the feeling of warm sunlight on water. He held those images in his mind. Gradually, the child's crying subsided. When Marcus opened his eyes, he found Kira watching him with curiosity rather than terror. "Better?" he asked. She nodded slightly, then looked up at her parents and spoke a few words in her own language. Dr. Veltar translated with a note of wonder in her voice. "She says you feel quiet inside, like snow falling. It's peaceful for her." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. He'd never thought about what his careful emotional control might feel like to an empathic being. To him, it was a survival mechanism. To this child, it was a source of comfort. "I'm going to help your parents get you to the medical station," he told Kira. "Is that okay?" She nodded again, and Marcus carefully helped her to her feet. Her parents spoke to Dr. Veltar in their musical language, then turned to Marcus with expressions of deep gratitude. "They want to thank you," Dr. Veltar said. "They say their daughter has been having nightmares since the attack started, afraid of every human she sees. You're the first human who hasn't frightened her." As they walked toward the medical station, Marcus became aware that they were being watched. Torres and Sarah were standing outside O'Malley's, observing the scene with expressions that ranged from confused to hostile. They'd seen him comforting an alien child, showing kindness to the very species they believed was a threat to humanity. He'd blown his cover before the mission had really begun. Or had he? As they reached the medical station and he helped Kira onto an examination table, Marcus realized that his actions might have actually strengthened his position. A truly committed anti-alien extremist wouldn't show compassion to alien children, but a discharged Marine who was conflicted about the situation, who had enough humanity left to help an injured child regardless of species. That was exactly the kind of person a resistance group would want to recruit and convert to their cause. "Thank you, Dr. Sosia," Veltar said as she began treating Kira's cut. "What you did back there, it made all the difference." Marcus watched as she worked, noting the gentle precision of her movements, the way she spoke softly to Kira in the Serrani language to keep her calm. "How many children have been hurt?" he asked. 5 now, counting Kira, but the psychological damage goes much deeper. Serrani children are taught from birth that emotions are something to be shared, that the feelings of others are just as important as their own. When they encounter deliberate cruelty, deliberate attempts to cause fear and pain, it violates everything they understand about how beings should treat each other. Dr. Veltar paused in her work. meeting his eyes with an expression of profound sadness. I believe some of them do, yes. I think they're specifically targeting Sirani children because they know the emotional impact will be greater. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. Using children as psychological weapons was a line he'd never crossed, even in the darkest days of the war. The fact that humans were doing it to innocent alien children made him ashamed of his own species. I'll find them, he said quietly. Will you? Dr. Veltar asked. And what will you do when you do? It was a good question, and one Marcus wasn't sure he could answer. The mission was to gather intelligence and wait for orders. But looking at this small, vulnerable child who had been terrorized simply for existing, Marcus wasn't sure he'd be able to maintain that level of professional detachment. Whatever it takes to stop them, he said finally. As he left the medical station, Marcus's communicator buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Sarah Mitchell. Drinks tonight, 2100 hours. O'Malley's. Time to see what you're really made of. Marcus looked back through the medical station's window at Kira, who was now smiling as Dr. Veltar showed her how the medical scanner worked. The child looked up and waved at him, a simple gesture of trust and gratitude that hit him harder than any enemy weapon ever had. He was about to infiltrate a group of humans who wanted to hurt children like her. And somewhere in the depths of his carefully controlled heart, Marcus realized that this mission had already become personal in a way that terrified him. The old Marcus, the one they called Frostbite, would have seen that as a liability. But maybe this new version of himself, the one who could make an empathic child feel safe just by thinking peaceful thoughts, could accomplish something that pure military efficiency never could. Maybe he could actually make a difference. The meeting at O'Malley's that night was unlike anything Marcus had expected. When he arrived at exactly 2100 hours, he found Sarah Mitchell sitting alone at a corner table, but the bar itself was nearly empty except for a few scattered patrons. She gestured for him to join her, and when he sat down, she slid a small device across the table. Audio scrambler, she said quietly. 15-foot radius. We can talk freely. Marcus pocketed the device, noting its military-grade construction. Impressive hardware for a civilian organization. We're not exactly civilians, Sarah replied, signaling the bartender for 2 beers. Most of us are former military, some are current military on extended leave. A few are contractors with access to equipment and information that the general public doesn't have. How many is most of us? On this station? About 30 core members, maybe 60 sympathizers who help when needed. But we're part of something bigger. There are similar groups on 12 other stations and 4 planetary colonies. We call ourselves the Human Heritage Foundation. The beers arrived, and Marcus took a sip while processing this information. An organized network with potential access to military resources was far more dangerous than a handful of disgruntled veterans acting on their own. What happened today with the alien child? Sarah continued. Torres thinks it means you're not committed to our cause. But I think it shows exactly why we need people like you. How so? Sarah leaned forward, her green eyes intense. Because you have a conscience. You saw a hurt child and you helped regardless of species. That tells me you're not a monster. But it also tells me you understand that our actions have to serve a purpose beyond just causing pain. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but internally he was reassessing Sarah Mitchell. She was more sophisticated than he'd given her credit for, and potentially more dangerous because of it. The incidents with the Sirani children, he said. What purpose did those serve? Psychological warfare, she replied without hesitation. The Sirani are one of the most influential species in the new alliance. They're natural diplomats, mediators. Their children represent the future of human-alien relations. If we can make those children associate humans with fear and trauma, it creates fractures in the alliance that could last for generations. The casual way she discussed traumatizing children made Marcus's stomach turn, but he forced himself to nod as if he understood the logic. And the parents? Exactly! Sirani are deeply family-oriented, attack their children. and the parents become protective rather than diplomatic. They start to see humans as a threat rather than partners. It's a long-term strategy to undermine the integration process from within. Clever, Marcus said, hating himself for the word. It is, but it's also just the beginning. The real question is whether you're ready to be part of something bigger. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, his communicator buzzed with an emergency alert. He glanced at it and felt his blood turn cold. Security alert, level yellow. All personnel remain in current sectors until further notice. Multiple injuries reported in Education District 7. Sarah was reading the same alert on her own device. She looked up at Marcus with an expression that was part satisfaction, part anticipation. That would be Phase 2, she said. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Phase 2 of what? Sit down, Marcus. You don't want to draw attention right now. But Marcus was already moving toward the exit. Children are hurt. I'm going to help. Sarah's voice followed him as he left the bar. You're making a choice, Marcus. Remember that. The corridors leading to Education District 7 were in chaos. Security teams were racing toward the scene while station personnel tried to evacuate non-essential civilians in the opposite direction. Marcus pushed against the flow of people, his military training taking over as he assessed the situation. The Education District was where alien children attended classes alongside human children, part of the cultural exchange program that was supposed to foster understanding between species. As Marcus approached the main building, he could see emergency medical teams setting up triage stations in the central courtyard. Sir, you need to remain in your sector. A security officer tried to stop him. I'm a former Marine medic, Marcus lied smoothly. I can help. The officer, overwhelmed by the situation, waved him through. The scene inside the education center was devastating. Someone had released some kind of chemical irritant into the ventilation system of the multi-species classroom wing. Human children were crying and coughing, their eyes streaming, but they would recover quickly. The alien children were in much worse condition. Marcus found Dr. Veltar working frantically over a young Korthak child whose breathing was severely labored. The chemical that was merely irritating to human physiology was apparently toxic to the Korthak respiratory system. What can I do? Marcus asked, dropping to his knees beside her. Hold pressure here. She indicated a spot on the child's neck. His breathing passages are swelling shut. I need to establish an airway, but I need both hands free. Marcus pressed down where she'd indicated, feeling the child's pulse racing under his fingers. Around them, other medical personnel were treating a dozen alien children, while human children sat in another area being examined for minor symptoms. This was targeted, Dr. Telson said. Veltar said as she worked. The chemical compound was specifically designed to affect non-human respiratory systems while being relatively harmless to humans. How do you know? Because I've seen it before. During the war, both sides developed biological weapons targeted at specific species. This is a modified version of something the Terran military created for use against Korthak ground forces. Marcus felt the world tilt around him. Military-grade chemical weapons meant this wasn't just a group of angry veterans with access to basic equipment. This was a sophisticated operation with connections to serious military resources. The child you helped this afternoon, Dr. Veltar continued, not looking up from her work. Pyrrha, she's been asking about you. She's okay? Physically, yes. But she's been having nightmares about humans coming to hurt her. When she woke up this morning, she asked her parents if the quiet human would come protect her. Something hot and bright flared in Marcus's chest, an emotion he couldn't identify but that felt like anger and protectiveness mixed together. The idea that this small child thought of him as protection, that she trusted him to keep her safe, made the thought of the humans responsible for this attack absolutely intolerable. Is she here? In the school? No. Her parents kept her home today because she was too frightened to come to classes. They probably saved her life. The Korthak child's breathing began to stabilize as With trust, Teddy, Veltar completed the emergency procedure. She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with a shaking hand. 14 children, she said quietly. 14 children poisoned because someone decided they don't belong here. Marcus looked around the medical treatment area. Alien children of multiple species were being treated for chemical exposure, while their parents stood nearby in various states of shock and rage. The human children had been quickly treated and released to their families, while the alien children faced hours of medical treatment and potential long-term health effects. "Doctor," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something. If someone wanted to stop the people doing this, what would you say to them?" Dr. Veltar looked at him sharply. "I would say that stopping them is necessary, but I would also say that how you stop them matters. If you become like them, if you let anger turn you into something cruel, then they've won even if they're defeated. And if the only way to stop them requires becoming something cruel, then you find another way," she said firmly, "because the moment we accept that cruelty is necessary, we've already lost everything worth protecting." Marcus's communicator buzzed again. "Another message from Sarah Mitchell. See what happens when we don't control the narrative? Phase 3 begins tomorrow. You're either with us or against us." As he helped carry injured children to the medical bay, Marcus realized that his mission had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just gathering intelligence on a group of human extremists. He was in a race against time to stop them before they escalated to something even worse than poisoning children. But Dr. Veltar's words echoed in his mind. How he stopped them mattered. The old Marcus, the one they called Frostbite, would have approached this as a military problem with a military solution. Find the enemy, neutralize the threat, accept whatever casualties were necessary to complete the mission. But that Marcus had never held a poisoned alien child while she struggled to breathe. That Marcus had never seen the trust in a frightened child's eyes when she called him the quiet human who could protect her. Later that night, Marcus sat in his apartment staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to be the kind of protector that Kira believed he was, while still stopping the people who wanted to hurt her. The Human Heritage Foundation was planning something called Phase 3. And given the escalation from vandalism to physical assault to chemical weapons, he didn't want to imagine what that might involve. His secure communicator, the one that connected him to Admiral Reeves, sat on his desk. He could call for backup, request immediate military intervention. They could probably stop the Human Heritage Foundation within hours. But that would also mean the end of any chance to understand the full scope of the organization, to identify all the cells on other stations and planets. From a strategic standpoint, it was better to let Phase 3 proceed so they could gather more intelligence. From a human standpoint, it was unthinkable. Marcus picked up the communicator, then set it down again. Then he picked it up and began typing a message to his handlers. Request immediate extraction and full tactical support. Situation has escalated beyond intelligence gathering. Children in immediate danger. He stared at the message for a long moment, his finger hovering over the send button. Then he deleted it and typed a different message. Infiltration proceeding as planned. Request enhanced backup protocols but maintain current operational parameters. Will advise when ready for Phase 2. It was a compromise that satisfied neither his strategic training nor his growing protective instincts. But it was the choice that gave him the best chance of stopping not just this cell of the Human Heritage Foundation, but the entire network. As he tried to sleep, Marcus found himself thinking about Kira's dark eyes and the way she'd waved at him from the medical station. Somewhere in this station, she was probably having nightmares about humans coming to hurt her, while her parents wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake in trusting the alliance between species. Tomorrow, he would have to attend a meeting where humans planned Phase 3 of their campaign against alien children. He would have to sit there and listen to them plan more attacks, more suffering, while maintaining his cover and gathering intelligence. But tonight, he was going to think calm thoughts. Snow falling on a peaceful lake. Wind in pine trees, the feeling of warm sunlight on water. Because somewhere in this station, a small, empathic child might be able to sense those thoughts and find some peace in them. It wasn't much, but it was what he could do, and sometimes that had to be enough. Marcus spent the next morning walking through the alien residential sectors, ostensibly looking for work but actually studying the security measures and daily routines. What he found made his blood run cold. The alien families had begun implementing their own protective protocols. Children traveling in groups with adult escorts, families avoiding public areas during certain hours, and most tellingly, a complete absence of the casual interaction between species that had been one of the station's greatest successes. The attack on the education center had accomplished exactly what the Human Heritage Foundation had intended. Fear was spreading through the alien communities like a virus, and trust was becoming a casualty of war even in peacetime. Marcus was observing a group of Sirani children being escorted to their classes by no fewer than 6 adults when he spotted a familiar small figure hanging back from the group. Kira was there, walking close to her parents, but she kept looking around nervously at every human who passed by. When she saw Marcus, her reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Instead of fear, her face lit up with recognition and something that looked like relief. She said something to her parents in the musical Sirani language and pointed at him. Her father approached Marcus cautiously. He was tall for a Sirani, with the characteristic pale blue skin and large dark eyes. But his posture spoke of barely contained tension. "You are Marcus," he said in accented but clear English. "My daughter wishes to thank you again for your kindness yesterday." "There's no need for thanks," Marcus replied. "Is she doing better?" "She slept peacefully last night for the first time in days," the father said. "She told us she dreamed of snow falling on a quiet lake. She said it felt like your thoughts." Marcus felt a jolt of surprise. He had been thinking those exact images the night before, deliberately projecting calm thoughts in case Kira could somehow sense them across the station. The fact that she had actually received them suggested a level of empathic connection he hadn't understood. "I was wondering," the father continued, "if you might consider something unusual. My daughter has been too frightened to attend her classes since the attacks began. But she trusts you. Would you be willing to escort her to the education center today? The presence of a human who feels quiet to her might help her overcome her fear." Marcus looked down at Kira, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. Accepting would mean spending time in the education center, observing the security responses and recovery efforts. It would be perfect reconnaissance for his mission. But it would also mean taking responsibility for this child's safety at the exact moment when her people were being targeted by the organization he was supposed to infiltrate. "I'd be honored," he said. The walk to the education center became a lesson in empathy that Marcus hadn't expected. Kira held his hand as they walked, and through that contact he began to understand what the station felt like to an empathic child. The undercurrents of fear, anger, and suspicion that humans barely noticed were like a constant assault on her senses. But when she focused on Marcus, those feelings faded to background noise. "How do you make it quiet?" she asked, looking up at him. "I spent a long time learning to control my emotions," Marcus said, trying to explain something he'd never really analyzed. "When I was a soldier, showing fear or anger could get people hurt. So I learned to put those feelings away. But don't you need them?" It was a more profound question than Marcus had expected from a child. "Sometimes, but not always." "I think you're very brave," Kira said seriously, "to keep all those feelings locked up so other people feel safe." Marcus found himself stopping in the middle of the corridor, struck by the simple wisdom of her observation. He'd always thought of his emotional control as a professional tool, a tactical advantage. He'd never considered it as a form of protection for others. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot coming from you." When they reached the education center, Marcus was surprised to see Dr. Veltar waiting near the entrance. She approached them with a warm smile for Kira and a questioning look for Marcus. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Kira's parents asked me to escort her to class," Marcus explained. "She's been having trouble with the crowds since the attack." Dr. Veltar knelt down to Kira's level and spoke to her in the Sirani language. The child responded with an animated explanation that involved several gestures toward Marcus. When she finished, Dr. Veltar looked up at him with an expression of amazement. "She says you feel like snow to her. Cool and quiet and peaceful. She wants to know if you would consider staying nearby while she attends classes." Marcus found himself agreeing before he'd fully considered the implications. He was supposed to be gathering intelligence on the Human Heritage Foundation, not serving as an emotional support system for an alien child. But looking at Kira's hopeful face, he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. The education center was still showing signs of the previous day's attack. The multi-species classrooms had been thoroughly decontaminated, but many alien parents had kept their children home. The normally vibrant mix of species in the corridors was reduced to mostly human children and a handful of brave alien families. Marcus found himself stationed in the corridor outside Kira's classroom, where he could observe the security measures while remaining close enough that she could sense his presence. It was an odd assignment for someone with his background, but it gave him an excellent vantage point to study the station's vulnerabilities. That was when he noticed the pattern. The security modifications implemented after the chemical attack were comprehensive but predictable. They focused on the ventilation systems and access points that had been compromised in the previous attack, but they left other vulnerabilities unprotected, vulnerabilities that a sophisticated adversary would already have identified and prepared to exploit. Marcus was studying the sightlines and escape routes when his secure communicator buzzed with a priority message. It was from Sarah Mitchell. "Emergency meeting. Maintenance Bay 7, Level 15. Come alone. Come now." The maintenance bays were in the industrial sector of the station, far from the residential and commercial areas where most people spent their time. As Marcus made his way through the increasingly deserted corridors, he realized that this was the perfect place for a confrontation. If the Human Heritage Foundation had decided he was a liability, they could eliminate him here without drawing attention. Maintenance Bay 7 turned out to be a large chamber filled with atmospheric processing equipment and industrial replicators. Sarah was waiting for him, along with Torres and 3 other humans Marcus didn't recognize. The fact that they'd brought backup suggested this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "You've been busy," Sarah said without preamble, "playing bodyguard to alien children, helping with medical emergencies, acting like some kind of hero." "I've been establishing credibility," Marcus replied. "Trust goes both ways. If I want information from them, they need to believe I'm not a threat. Or," said one of the men Marcus didn't recognize, "you're exactly what you appear to be. A former Marine who's gone soft and thinks he can play both sides." The man was military, Marcus could tell immediately. The way he stood, the way he assessed the room for tactical advantages, the casual confidence that came from combat experience. This was someone dangerous. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, formerly of the 3rd Colonial Marines," the man said. "I've read your service record, Chen. The real one, not the fabricated version they gave you for this mission." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. If they knew his real service record, they knew he wasn't a discharged malcontent. They knew he was active military on a classified assignment. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said. But even as he spoke, he was calculating distances and angles, preparing for violence. "Captain Marcus Chen," Harrison continued, "decorated veteran of the Kepler Station Defense, currently assigned to Naval Intelligence Division. Sent here to infiltrate and gather intelligence on anti-alien resistance groups. The confirmation that his cover was blown should have triggered immediate extraction protocols. Marcus should have been reaching for his emergency beacon, calling for backup, preparing to fight his way out. Instead, he found himself thinking about Kira sitting in her classroom, trusting that he would be there when she needed him. "The question," Sarah said, "is what we do about it." "Kill him," Torres said bluntly. "He knows too much about our operations. That would be wasteful, Harrison replied. He's exactly what we need for Phase 3. I'm not following, Marcus said, still trying to understand how his cover had been compromised. Harrison smiled coldly. Phase 3 requires someone with access to station security protocols and military-grade equipment. Someone who can get close to alien families without arousing suspicion. Someone who's already established himself as a protector of alien children. The full scope of their plan hit Marcus like a physical blow. They wanted him to use his position of trust to betray the very people who had come to rely on him for protection. They wanted him to be the weapon that hurt Kira and children like her. Never, Marcus said quietly. Oh, but you will, Harrison said, producing a small device from his pocket. You see, we've been monitoring your communications with naval intelligence. We know about your extraction protocols, your backup procedures, your emergency contacts, and we've been very busy preparing some insurance. The device in Harrison's hand was a detonator. Marcus recognized the military-grade construction immediately. Maintenance Bay 12, Harrison continued, is directly adjacent to the Serrani residential sector. We've placed enough explosives there to breach the hull and decompress that entire section of the station. 237 Serrani civilians, including 48 children. You're bluffing. Sarah, show him the live feed. Sarah activated a wall display that showed a real-time view of Maintenance Bay 12. Marcus could see the explosive charges, military-grade thermal detonators that would indeed be sufficient to breach the station's hull. But more importantly, he could see the Serrani families going about their daily routines in the adjacent corridor. Here's your choice, Captain Chen, Harrison said. You're going to help us execute Phase 3, or we're going to execute every Serrani on this station, including your little empathic friend. Marcus stared at the screen, watching Serrani children play in corridors that could become vacuum-exposed death traps at the push of a button. Everything in his military training told him to call their bluff, to trust that backup would arrive in time, to prioritize the larger mission over immediate threats. But one of those children might be Kira, and she trusted him to protect her. What exactly is Phase 3? Marcus asked. Harrison's smile widened. We're going to make it look like the aliens attacked first. The plan they outlined for him was sophisticated and ruthless. Using Marcus's access and trusted status, they would plant evidence that alien extremists were planning a terrorist attack on the station's human population. The evidence would be discovered during a security sweep that Marcus would request based on his infiltration of alien resistance groups. The resulting crackdown on alien families would justify increasingly harsh security measures. When the aliens inevitably protested these measures, the Human Heritage Foundation would stage false flag attacks that appeared to come from alien terrorists. The cycle of retaliation and counter-retaliation would eventually lead to the complete segregation of species on the station, exactly what the organization wanted. And if the aliens don't take the bait? Marcus asked. Then we help them along, Torres said. A few attacks on human children, blamed on alien extremists. Nothing permanent. Just enough to get humans angry and demanding action. You're talking about hurting human children to advance your agenda. We're talking about protecting humanity's future, Harrison said coldly. Sometimes that requires sacrifice. Marcus looked around the room, at the faces of people who were willing to hurt children of any species to advance their political goals. These weren't patriots or protectors. They were terrorists who happened to be human. I need time to think about this, Marcus said. You have 1 hour, Harrison replied. After that, we proceed with or without your cooperation. And if we proceed without your cooperation? He didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus could see the detonator in his hand, could see the live feed of Serrani families going about their peaceful lives, unaware that their existence hung in the balance. As Marcus left Maintenance Bay 7, his mind was racing through possibilities and contingencies. He could call for immediate military intervention, but that would take time he didn't have. He could try to evacuate the Serrani residential sector, but that would alert the Human Heritage Foundation and trigger the detonation. Or he could do something that Marcus Frostbite Chin would never have considered. He could trust someone else to help him find a solution that didn't require choosing between his mission and innocent lives. His communicator showed a message from the education center. Kira has been asking about you. Her teacher says she's having trouble concentrating because she can't sense your quiet thoughts. Could you return when convenient? Dr. Veltar. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he began walking back toward the education center, toward a small alien child who trusted him to protect her, toward a decision that would define not just the success of his mission, but the kind of person he was going to be. The old Marcus would have calculated odds and made the tactically sound choice. But the new Marcus, the one who made empathic children feel safe just by existing, was about to do something that had nothing to do with military tactics and everything to do with being human. Marcus found Dr. Veltar in the Education Center's medical office, reviewing treatment protocols for the children who had been exposed to the chemical attack. When she looked up and saw his expression, her large eyes immediately filled with concern. "What's wrong?" she asked. Marcus closed the door behind him and activated the audio scrambler he'd taken from Sarah Mitchell. "I need your help," he said, "and I need you to trust me completely. Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus explained everything. His real identity, his mission, the Human Heritage Foundation's plans, and the bombs that were currently threatening the Serrani residential sector." Doc Veltar listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. 237 people, she said when he finished, including Kira's family. "I have 43 minutes to stop them," Marcus said, "but I can't do it alone. I need someone who understands this station's systems better than I do, and someone the alien communities trust. What do you need me to do? Help me save everyone." Dr. Veltar was quiet for a moment, then activated her own communication device. "This is Dr. Veltar requesting priority contact with Chief Engineer Toksh and Security Chief Morrison. Medical emergency authorization." Within minutes, the Korthak engineer and human security chief had arrived at the medical office. Marcus found himself face-to-face with Commander Takesh, whom he'd fought against during the war, and Captain Lisa Morrison, a human officer whose reputation for competence and integrity was well known throughout the fleet. "Gentlemen, we have a situation," Dr. Veltar began, and once again Marcus found himself explaining the full scope of the Human Heritage Foundation's plans. Commander Toksh's reaction was immediate and practical. "Show me the bomb locations," he demanded, studying Marcus's intelligence on a holographic display. "These thermal detonators, they're not just placed to breach the hull. They're positioned to create a cascade failure that would destroy the entire residential ring." "How many people?" Captain Morrison asked, with trust Teddy. "Conservative estimate? 8,000 casualties across all species," Tax replied grimly. "This isn't just terrorism. This is genocide." Marcus felt the weight of those numbers settle on his shoulders. 8,000 lives, including every alien child on the station, including Kira, who trusted him to protect her. "We need to evacuate immediately," Morrison said, reaching for her communicator. "No," Marcus said quickly. "They're monitoring security frequencies. Any large-scale evacuation will trigger immediate detonation." "Then what do you propose?" Dr. Veltar asked. Marcus looked around the room at three beings who should have been his enemies but had become his allies in the span of a few days. A Sirani doctor who healed without prejudice, a Korthak engineer who built bridges instead of weapons, and a human security officer could put duty above species loyalty. "We give them what they want," Marcus said. "We let Phase 3 proceed, but we control how it happens." The plan they developed over the next 20 minutes was audacious and dangerous. Marcus would return to the Human Heritage Foundation and agree to cooperate, but he would modify their plan in subtle ways. Instead of planting evidence of alien terrorism, he would plant evidence that led to the discovery of the bombs. Instead of implicating innocent alien families, He would create a trail that pointed directly to the Human Heritage Foundation itself. The key, Commander Taksh explained, is that I can remotely disable the detonators if I have direct access to their frequency, but I need someone to get close enough to scan them. That's my job, Marcus said. I'll tell them I need to inspect the devices to make sure they're properly positioned. What about the other cells? Captain Morrison asked. Harrison mentioned 12 stations and 4 planetary colonies. We use their own network against them, Dr. Beltar suggested. Once we have evidence of their activities here, we can track their communications to identify the other cells. It was a complex plan with multiple points of failure, but it was their only chance to save the station without triggering a massacre. Marcus returned to Maintenance Bay 7 with 5 minutes to spare on Harrison's deadline. The colonel was waiting for him, still holding the detonator, still smiling that cold, satisfied smile. I'm in, Marcus said. But I want to see the devices. If we're going to frame the aliens for terrorism, the evidence has to be perfect. Smart thinking, Harrison said. Taurus, take him to Bay 12. The walk through the maintenance corridors gave Marcus time to activate the scanning device that Commander Taksh had given him. As they passed through the checkpoint near the Serrani residential sector, Marcus could hear the sounds of normal life just beyond the bulkhead. Children playing, families talking, the musical cadence of Serrani conversation. Maintenance Bay 12 was a mirror image of Bay 7, filled with atmospheric processing equipment and industrial systems. But hidden among the legitimate machinery were the thermal detonators, positioned with military precision to maximize structural damage. Impressive work, Marcus said, moving close to examine the devices while the scanner did its job. Professional-grade placement. Taurus replied, He's been planning this for months. Marcus nodded, continuing to move around the bay while the scanner recorded frequencies and technical specifications. How many cells are involved in the overall operation? Teddy. We've got people on every major station and most of the colony worlds. When this kicks off, it's going to be simultaneous across human space. The scope of the conspiracy was even larger than Marcus had feared. Hundreds of thousands of alien civilians across dozens of worlds, all targeted for a coordinated campaign of terrorism and manipulation. But now they had the technical data they needed to stop it. I've seen enough, Marcus said. Let's get back to Harrison. As they walked back through the corridors, Marcus's communicator buzzed with a seemingly routine message from Dr. Veltar. Patient showing normal vital signs, proceeding with planned treatment. It was the code phrase they'd agreed upon. Commander Tox had successfully accessed the detonator frequency and was ready to disable the devices remotely. But when they returned to Bay 7, Marcus found the situation had changed dramatically. Sarah Mitchell was there, along with 6 other humans he didn't recognize, all armed with military-grade weapons. Problem, Colonel, Sarah said to Harrison. We've got Security Chief Morrison asking questions about unusual activity in the maintenance sectors. Someone's been talking. Harrison's cold eyes fixed on Marcus. Interesting timing, Captain Chen. You wouldn't happen to know anything about increased security attention, would you? Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. If Morrison had been detected, their entire plan was compromised. I've been with Torres for the last 30 minutes, Marcus said. Check your security feeds. Harrison gestured to one of the armed men who activated a portable display showing internal security cameras. The feeds clearly showed Marcus and Torres moving through the maintenance areas, examining the bombs, returning to Base 7. Clean, the man reported. No contact with station security. But Harrison wasn't satisfied. Strip him down and scan for electronics, he ordered. 2 of the armed men moved toward Marcus, weapons raised. This was the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart completely. That's when the lights went out, with emergency lighting kicked in. A few seconds later, casting the maintenance bay in dim red illumination. In the confusion, Marcus heard Commander Taksh's voice over the station's public address system. Attention all station personnel. This is Chief Engineer Tax. We have detected serious structural integrity issues in Maintenance Bay 12. All personnel must evacuate the surrounding areas immediately. This is not a drill. The evacuation alert was the signal. As Harrison and his people tried to figure out what was happening, Marcus moved. His military training took over, and within seconds, 3 of the armed men were down and disarmed. But Harrison still had the detonator. "One more step and I detonate everything," the colonel snarled, backing toward the bay's emergency exit. "Go ahead," Marcus said calmly. "Commander Tax disabled your devices 20 minutes ago." Harrison's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, rage, and finally desperate calculation. He pressed the detonation button on his device, and nothing happened. Then he pressed it again and again. "You're finished, Harrison," Marcus said. "We have recordings of everything you've told me, technical specifications of your devices, and communication logs that will lead us to every cell in your network." The colonel looked around the bay at his defeated subordinates, then at the useless detonator in his hand. For a moment, Marcus thought he might surrender. Instead, Harrison pulled a sidearm and pointed it directly at Marcus's chest. "If I can't complete the mission," he said, "I can at least eliminate the threat." The gunshot was impossibly loud in the enclosed space of the maintenance bay. Marcus felt the impact, felt himself falling backward, felt the sharp pains spreading across his chest. As his vision began to tunnel, he could hear security teams breaching the bay, could hear Harrison screaming orders that no one was following. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Dr. Veltar's face leaning over him, her large eyes filled with concern and determination. "Stay with us, Marcus," she said. "Kira is waiting for you." Marcus woke up in the station's medical bay 3 days later. The first face he saw was Dr. Veltar's, followed quickly by Commander Takshish and Captain Morrison. But the face he was most relieved to see was Kira's, peering around the edge of his medical bed with those large, dark eyes full of concern. "You're awake?" Dr. Veltar said with obvious relief. "We weren't sure. The damage was extensive." "Harrison?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had recently been removed. "In custody, along with 37 other members of the Human Heritage Foundation across 14 installations," Captain Morrison reported. "Your intelligence led us to their entire network. We've prevented coordinated attacks that would have killed thousands." "The bombs? Disabled and removed," Commander Taksh said. "Your plan worked perfectly." The evidence trail led investigators directly to the Human Heritage Foundation, while protecting innocent alien families from suspicion. Marcus tried to sit up, but Dr. Veltar gently pushed him back down. "You need rest. You've been unconscious for 3 days." "Kira," he said, looking at the child. "Are you okay?" She nodded seriously, then spoke in her musical language to Dr. Veltar, who translated with a smile. "She says you feel different now, warmer. Less like snow and more like sunlight." Marcus considered this, realizing that something fundamental had changed in him during the crisis. The careful emotional control that had defined his military career was still there, but it was no longer a wall between him and the world. It had become something more like a foundation, a solid base from which he could choose to feel and care and connect. "She also says," Dr. Veltar continued, "that she would like you to stay on the station if possible. Her parents have formally requested that you be assigned as a permanent cultural liaison to the Serrani community." "And Admiral Reeves has approved the transfer," Captain Morrison added. "Apparently, your actions here have convinced Starfleet Command that we need more officers who understand that true strength sometimes means choosing compassion over conquest." Over the following weeks, as Marcus recovered and settled into his new role, he learned the full scope of what they had accomplished. When the Human Heritage Foundation's network had been completely dismantled, preventing attacks that would have set back human-alien relations by decades. More importantly, the way they had stopped the conspiracy, through cooperation between species rather than human military action alone, had become a model for future security operations. Marcus found his new duties as cultural liaison both challenging and rewarding. He spent his days helping resolve disputes between species, facilitating communication between different alien communities, and serving as a bridge between the military mindset and the diplomatic reality of station life. But his favorite part of each day was the hour he spent in the education center, where Kira and other empathic children had begun gathering around him during their breaks. They called him the quiet teacher, and he'd begun teaching them meditation techniques that helped them manage their empathic abilities in crowded environments. It was during one of these informal sessions that Dr. Veltar approached him with a proposition that would change his life once again. "The Sirani Council has been impressed with your work here," she said. "They've asked if you would consider accepting a position as an official ambassador to the Empathic Species Alliance. It would mean traveling to different worlds, learning new cultures, helping establish communication protocols between empathic and non-empathic species." Marcus looked around at the circle of alien children who trusted him to help them find peace in their chaotic empathic experiences. A few months ago, he would have seen them as potential enemies, or, at best, diplomatic complications. Now he saw them as the future of interspecies cooperation, children who would grow up in a galaxy where different species worked together instead of fighting each other. What would that mean for Kira and the others here? He asked. It would mean showing them that the galaxy is bigger and more wonderful than they ever imagined, Dr. Veltar said. And it would mean that other empathic children on other worlds could benefit from what you've learned here. Marcus stood up from the circle of children who were practicing the breathing exercises he'd taught them. Kira looked up at him with those large, trusting eyes. "Will you visit us?" she asked. "Every chance I get," Marcus promised. "And maybe someday, when you're older, you can come with me to meet empathic children on other worlds." 6 months later, Captain Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the starship Harmony, watching the stars stream past at faster-than-light velocity as they approached the Sirani home system. His official title was Ambassador for Empathic Species Relations, and his mission was to establish formal communication protocols with newly discovered empathic civilizations. But in his heart, he was still the quiet teacher, who had learned that true strength wasn't about controlling emotions or shutting down feelings. It was about choosing when to feel, when to care, and when to let compassion guide action instead of fear. The war that had shaped his early military career was over. The peace that had seemed impossible was becoming reality. One relationship at a time, one act of understanding at a time. And, somewhere on, Cold Words, Kind Souls, the Alien Encounter That Changed a Human Veteran Forever. Part 1, HFY Sci-Fi.